The Monetary Fund has estimated Sierra Leone's economy to slow down to 5.6% in 2017 from 6.3% in 2016, mainly on account of reduced activities in the non-mining sector. The IMF made the statement at the end of its review mission to Sierra Leone. The IMF says the government budget for 2017 will need to address lower than budgeted revenue and a shortfall in donor receipts. The current account deficit is expected to widen to 21.5% of GDP. According to IMF, mitigating the impact of floods and mudslides which occurred in Freetown in mid-August and resulted in the death of hundreds of people and displacement of thousands should be a major focus on government policy. And the International Finance Corporation is interested in the acceleration of Nigeria's debt market through the integration of corporate debts. In an interview, the Vice President and Treasurer International Finance Corporation, Mr. Jing Dong-hua, tells Channel's television business producer Temple Ashaju how the initiative can lessen Nigeria's debt servicing burden.
Indeed, Nigeria is a very special country. I always see Nigeria, what Nigeria is to sub-Saharan Africa is what China, India to Asia. And therefore, for Africa to achieve its dream of economic growth, Nigeria has to be one of its strongest growth engines. And for that to happen, you need a vibrant, deep, liquid capital market. And therefore, I think this 2017 Nigeria Debt Capital Market Conference is very timely, because Nigeria already has one of the most dynamic capital markets in the region. And we now need to come together to discuss how can we accelerate the development of the debt capital market so that we can have the magnitude of financing for private sector growth, for economic growth in the country. You know, we can learn a lot from what Asia did, because 20 years ago, Asia faced a similar currency crisis called the Asian financial crisis. And since the crisis, Asian government decided they have to make a focused effort in developing their domestic capital market so that they have a mechanism to efficiently recycle domestic savings for their economic growth. And a lot has been achieved. But give you a couple of examples. Right now, in South Korea, the corporate bond market is about 70% of GDP. In Malaysia, corporate bond market is 100% of GDP. So in Malaysia, over $300 billion of corporate bond has been issued. Just imagine that magnitude of bonds circulating and connecting between savings and productive private sector investment. In Nigeria, corporate bond is still a single-digit percentage of GDP. That means there is a huge, huge potential for us to really accelerate the trajectory. And also at the same time, Nigeria is developing a very healthy savings industry with your pension, with your insurance, with your institutional investors, with sovereign wealth fund. We need a vibrant capital market to connect that saving to infrastructure financing, to SME financing, to agribusiness financing. I think it's quite exciting.
What then do you make of the costs to debt servicing ratio? Because that is a source of concern to a lot of investors and the citizenry.
Well, let me put it this way, right? For you to reach the billions and tens of billions of dollars needed, or naira, trillions of nairas needed to finance economic development, you can't really just rely on government budget and government debt, okay? If we can structure most of the investment as financially sustainable private sector projects, we can incur corporate debt in a sustainable way. And that has been shown in a lot of other countries who have gone through the trajectory of economic development. For example, in China, China built its infrastructure, its bullet train network, its hydro dams, essentially using the bond market. Yeah? And as you build basic infrastructure, economic activities will accelerate. As you have more economic activities, the level of debt to a much bigger GDP will become smaller. So you want to develop a virtuous economic cycle. So I don't think, at the end of the day, if most of the projects are financed by private sector through capital market in a sustainable way, you will have a concern over a debt issue. What we need to do is to make sure that we don't indebt the government unnecessarily. So if a project can be done by private sector in a financially and commercially sustainable way, we as IFC and the World Bank, we should ensure that private sector is given a chance to do this project. I think that's really critical in the economic policy and in the development planning of the country.
We've also been made to know that the debt capital market also has a solution for the FX gaps. But how can you help us understand this better?
You know, let me put it this again, that anytime you have a challenge, it's also an opportunity. For example, when the foreign debt capital market is sort of closed, that actually gives us a focus on how we can accelerate domestic capital market development. And that's exactly what happened in Asia 20 years ago with the onset of Asian financial crisis. So within about 10 years after the Asian financial crisis, the Asian government, private sector regulators came together and said, we must develop our domestic and regional capital market. We must denominate our economy much more in our domestic and regional currencies. So they developed a resilience and vibrancy of their economy, so much so that when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, the impact for East Asia was much, much smaller than in 1997 when Asian financial crisis happened. So one of the benefits in Nigeria is that we can take all of these lessons and we can leapfrog and we can avoid the mistakes that some of the other countries have made.
And in Kenya, the economy grew more slowly in the second quarter of this year compared with the same period in 2016, owing to a weaker performance in agriculture, manufacturing and financial services. Data from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics shows the economy expanded by 5% year-on-year in the second quarter compared with 6.3% in the same period in 2016. It had expanded by 4.7% in the first quarter of 2017. The KNBS said in its statement that agriculture contracted by 1.7% from growth of 7.1% a year earlier, while accommodation and food services, which includes tourism, grew by 13.4%, down from 15.8% in the previous year. Tourism, along the tea, horticulture and remittances, are Kenya's leading sources of foreign exchange. Kenya's current account deficit widened to 134.8 billion shillings in the quarter under review from a deficit of 114.1 billion shillings in the second quarter of 2016. And finally, Uganda's inflation rose slightly to 5.3% year-on-year in September from 5.2% a month earlier. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics said core inflation, which excludes food, electricity and metered water, edged up to 4.2% during the period from 4.1%. And that's a wrap on the program. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago.